into the sea, mountains into the sea.
Welcome to the Our State Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. Today's episode with Kristy Woodson Harvey was recorded in front of a live audience at the Silver Coast Winery in Ocean Isle Beach.
Mountains in the sea.
Thank you all so much for coming to Silver Coast Winery. This is such a wonderful facility and a great venue, and they have such great events here. It's an honor to be here with Kristy. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and to be here with Our State and to be here with all of you. It's a wonderful night, so thank you for making the trip.
Oh my gosh, yes, I have to echo that before we start. Thank you, Wiley, so much for coming out here to interview me tonight. And Dawn and everybody at Pelican Books, I'm so happy to be here. And to all of you, and to Our State, of course, I have to tell this little story because Our State was the first place that I ever got paid to write an article. So, yeah, I know. So I was like, this is fantastic. So thank you guys so much for all your hard work and advertising and all of the amazing things. And Wiley, your article was so good. I've actually quoted you in parts of my talk because I loved it so much.
Well, doing some book tour advance work. That sounds great. I want to remind folks that we're recording a live episode of the Our State Book Club podcast. And you can find the Our State Book Club podcast wherever you find your podcast. Apple, Spotify, get your kids or your grandkids to show you how to do it. I'm looking out at some of y'all and you're like, that sounds fun. What's a podcast? Is that like a cult? Do I have to do something illegal to be part of that? Because I'll do it. I love Kristy. You can also find it on YouTube. So we're at a winery. And I'm wondering how many of you have had enough wine to believe that I'm Nicholas Sparks and she's Jan Karen. Because we're talking about the Notebook in the Midford series tonight.
We're so excited.
We're so excited to be here with y'all.
About that.
And I don't know if you've seen Nick and Jan, but we look fantastic.
We do. I've had some work done.
As have I. Well, Kristy, it's great to be with you. We've already recorded one episode in Beaufort, in beautiful Beaufort, which is the setting of Kristy's new novel, A Happier Life. We had a wonderful time. Got to go out and have lunch with the Queen of Beaufort. It's like walking around Washington, D.C., outside the gates of the White House. It was just a wonderful day, and I really, really enjoyed it.
So, but Salt is really the famous one.
Salt is the famous one.
Yeah, my dog is the famous one.
And Salt makes an appearance in the new book if you haven't read it yet. So to start us off here, Kristy, in the first episode of the podcast, we talked a lot about your path to becoming a writer. We talked about friends in fiction. We talked a little bit about the business of writing. For this episode, I want to talk specifically about the book that you are all here to get signed and to purchase and to read. So tell us a little bit about A Happier Life, which is your 11th novel.
Yes. Gosh, isn't that crazy? 11th, I know. So A Happier Life is about a woman named Keaton who knows that her grandparents passed away in an accident before she was born. But what she doesn't know is that her mother and her uncle never sold their childhood home in Beaufort, North Carolina, and that it has been sitting empty, practically, for almost 50 years. So Keaton decides that she is going to be the one to go back to Beaufort, put this house on the market, and hopefully at least put a little bit of a Band-Aid on this kind of painful chapter of her mother's life. But when she arrives, she finds a house that is basically a time capsule. And as she starts to wade through the detritus of her grandparents' lives, and of course starts to get to know a lot of the Beaufort locals who sort of take her under their wing and not only tell her stories about her grandparents, but also tell her how to fix her life because she is not doing it appropriately. And we all need someone like that. And there are a lot of those people in Beaufort. You can find them if you want them. And she starts to realize that maybe the things she's been told about her grandparents her entire life aren't completely true. So in the other point of view, we get to hear from Rebecca St. James, who is Keaton's grandmother, and she is known as Beaufort's finest hostess. And you want a ticket to a Rebecca St. James summer supper. It is the hottest thing going in the small town. And she is a woman who believes that being the person that takes care of other people is the most important thing that you can do with your life. And so her entire story sort of centers around that idea, including the reason that she is keeping a really big secret from her family in the summer of 1976. So we get to watch Bex's story unfold from 1935 until that fateful night in 1976, when we find out what happened to Rebecca and Townsend St. James.
So that's a great setup. That's a great summary of the novel. It's very complicated, these two timelines, this really strong collection of powerful women who, unbeknownst to Keaton, are kind of conversing across generations in a way that's really heartfelt and really meaningful. So one thing that really caught my attention and really enchanted me with this novel was the decision you made to have the St. James house act as a narrator. So can you tell us a little bit about opening the novel in the voice of this house and this gorgeous kind of wistful, longing, narrative voice, and just a little bit about what old houses mean to you?
Absolutely. So originally, when I wrote the first draft of this novel, I had an entire point of view from the house that, it wasn't every fourth chapter or anything. We probably heard from the house, 6 or 7 times throughout the novel. And when I got to the end of it, I just thought maybe it was a little too much. Like, I wanted to hear from the house, but maybe not quite as much as we actually did. But I think the point of having the prologue from the house's point of view is that one of the things that really inspired this story was the idea that our houses hold our secrets and our houses hold our stories, and that there's a little bit and piece of every person that has ever lived in a house kind of still within its walls. And maybe that sounds a little woo-woo, but I kind of believe that. So I live in a 1903 house in Beaufort, and I just am always kind of very aware of the fact that it's not really my house. I'm a caretaker of this house until another generation comes along and decides to put, their mark on it. And there are many, many generations that have come before me, and hopefully many that will come after. I think the thing that makes the St. James house special, though, that I really love the idea of, is the fact that it has always been the St. James house. It's one of the only houses in Beaufort. This is not real. I made it up. But just to be clear.
It's real. Don't doubt Jan Karen.
But a lot of the history in this book is real. So I just, and there are houses in Beaufort that do have these real, stories. So I did want to be clear, I'm making up the St. James house. But in this story, this book has actually been in their family since the 1700s when it was built. And so it gives it almost a little more weight and importance in the eyes of this family and this family's story and legacy. And in Keaton's mind, too, I think it begins to feel really important because of that.
Well, also because there are these little elements of history in the house. She kind of peels the house back, because when she arrives at the house, it's in kind of a amber time capsule, right? It's been untouched, and so it looks as if people have just gotten up and left. And as she looks through different rooms or different drawers or different place settings, she begins to kind of understand something about these people who have become before her, whose lives were a little bit obscured by her mother and her uncle. And if you would indulge us, you had an experience growing up in Salsbury with an old house. Would you share that story with us?
I will. So one of the pieces of inspiration for this novel is that when I was 10 years old, we moved to a new house. And actually, our neighbors, who this book is dedicated to, were our neighbors at our old house. And this house across the street came on the market right when we moved, and my parents called our neighbors and said, "You have to buy this house so that we can be neighbors again." And they did. But the crazy thing about this house is that it had been empty for almost 50 years. And I was one of the first people to walk in this house. I was 10 years old. And, when you're 10, things are kind of happening to you a lot, I think. And so I don't know that I gave too terribly much thought to this, but we walked in the house, and there was, the entrance foyer, and when you looked over to the right, the entire Thanksgiving meal was on the table from 50 years ago. So the turkey, this was the thing that I remember the most. And I think about this now, and I'm like, my mother would die if she knew that I touched this. But the turkey, you would think it would have been like disintegrated and falling apart, but it was petrified. Like it was like wood on the table. But like all the dishes were set, like the things were out in the kitchen that, you would have from preparing a Thanksgiving meal. The newspaper was out on the couch. There were shoes by the door. There were toys out in kids' rooms, like mid-play. I actually snagged a baby doll and took it with me because I felt so sorry for it. I was like, this baby doll has been alone in this house for 50 years. I named her Sally. I don't know what her real name was, but I was her new adoptive mother, so she got a new name. But it was a bizarre experience, but something that I had just kind of filed away. And so when I set out to tell this story about this woman kind of rediscovering these people that she never knew, I thought, well, what better way to do it than through a house that has been basically untouched? And so all those memories kind of came back to me of that house. And of course, they gutted the house, made it gorgeous, and brought it back to life. So it's interesting.
In any other region of the country, they would have walked into that house and said, oh my gosh, the zombie apocalypse happened.
Right.
But in the South, y'all might have been like, oh Lord, they got raptured and we got left behind.
Right.
Is that did that come up? Did that come up? I bet that came up. It's Salsbury. That had to come up.
No,
like, Mom, why are you crying?
But the funny thing is that no one believed this family had gotten in this huge fight at Thanksgiving and left. They didn't believe that story. And I was like, well, that story's true because I saw the turkey. Saw the turkey.
So this new novel is set in Beaufort, where you've lived full-time for...
Like 7 years?
Yeah. So what was it like setting a novel in Beaufort for the first time?
Okay, so first of all, I just have to say this. So people have said to me, like, well, how do people feel about you setting this book in Beaufort? And I had my first 2 events in Beaufort yesterday and the day before. But right before I left for tour, I was on the dock on the waterfront. And of course, the town's really small, so people know I have a book coming out and that it's set in Beaufort. And there was this conversation happening around me as though I was not standing there. Like, I really like that she set the book in Beaufort. I think it's going to do really good things for our real estate prices. Somebody else was like, I don't know. I think we're just going to get more tourists than we really want. It's like, I'm right here. We can talk about it, but I'm standing here too. It was hilarious. So we'll see how Beaufort feels about it. But it honestly took me 7 years of living there to feel like I could fully capture what it is that I love about this town so much. And I wanted to get it right. Like, I wanted you to read this story and feel like you were in Beaufort. And I think a huge part of that has to do with the characters, and making them kind of come to life. I mean, down to somebody asked me about the, pirate handyman that's in the book today. And I'm like, well, yeah, no, I mean, that's real. Like, we have a pirate handyman in Beaufort because, obviously we do, because there's a pirate invasion. And like, it's you can either walk down the street in Beaufort or Greenville, North Carolina, and you see someone dressed as a pirate and you don't even flinch. You're like, yeah, see, yeah. But it really did take me a while to just feel like I could adequately write about what it was to live there. And I hope I did it justice because I do love it so much.
I think you did. In the first episode of the podcast, which comes out tomorrow, so Spotify, Apple, iTunes.
We can do a tutorial on the phone
YouTube.
later.
Yeah, we'll do a tutorial after the taping tonight. We talked about, in the first episode, we talked about how there are so many little jewels in eastern North Carolina.
Yes.
Ocean Isle, Oak Island, Beaufort, all the way up the coast, Kinston, where you were before, and how much mystery and wonder are in these little places. Was it fun to write about Beaufort with that little... As a writer, I think when we're creating characters, I think of having a little spoon, and you just dig, and you dig, and you dig, and you dig, and just see how deep you can penetrate into a place. Was it fun doing that? Where you just look out the window and think, oh, what's going down there on the dock?
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you what was fun about it, too, is that I feel like I know a fair amount about the history of Beaufort. But when I say that, I know about a fair amount about the history of Beaufort from the 17 and 1800s, because that's what we talk about a lot, because Beaufort's such an old town. So that's what we hear about. That's the piece of history that we know when we live there. And then, of course, I live there now, so I feel like I know a little bit about it now. But I didn't really know anything about it in the era that I wrote about, which was like mostly the 70s, but also the 30s, 40s, 50s, and on. So I got to do a lot of research into that time period in Beaufort and sort of the whole Crystal Coast, and was amazed at the things that happened there. I mean, in the 30s, there were all these bands from New York City that would like make their way from the Coconut Grove Club in New York, like down to Atlantic Beach, and everyone would go over, and just little things like that were just these really interesting little pieces of history that I got to learn while, reading on the microfilm machine, which is hard. It's very difficult.
The internet is much easier.
Yeah, the internet is much easier. But it was funny, like what had been digitized and what hadn't. So part of it I could read online, and part of it I was like at the library, doing the real research. It felt kind of authentic and gratifying.
Were any of the patrons at the library like, here she is again, gonna bring property values down?
No, up. No, they think I'm going to bring the
Tourist
property
bad,
values
property
up.
value good.
Yeah. So that's a positive.
So in A Happier Life, our main character, Keaton, it is a tragicomedy, a comic tragedy, the way she finds herself at Beaufort.
That's what I quoted from you. That's what I quoted you. I'm like, Wiley Cash says through a series of comically tragic events.
Comically tragic events that I in the early pages of the novel, I was like, don't do that, no, don't say that, don't trust that guy, don't do that, no. But it's really fun. It's very contemporary. Your presentation of Keaton and the pulls and the pressures on her life. And you've said a little bit about the pulls and pressures on the lives of contemporary women, contemporary professional women, contemporary mothers. Can you talk about how you explored that in this book?
Yes, and I have to say I didn't even really mean to. Like, it was something that I think kind of happened in the book that I wasn't really planning to happen. But as Keaton gets to know the grandmother that she never knew in real life, she starts to realize that not only does she not know anything about her grandmother, but she doesn't really know anything about the things that her grandmother loved. So all of the traditions that were so important to Bex, and her entertaining and the way that she took care of her family and other people, and that's just not something that has been important to Keaton in her life until now. And so when she is at her grandmother's house and she's reading her grandmother's entertaining notebook and learning her little tips, she sort of starts to feel this kind of sadness for this life that she never knew, and starts to want to recreate some of that in a way, which, again, was not something that I planned to happen in the novel, but I thought was sort of fun. And then it did remind me, I mean, I'm very big on tradition and upholding all of the things that we did in our family, but the reality is that sometimes just don't have time, like my life is just vastly different from those of the generations that came before me. And so I think there's that push-pull of so desperately wanting to hang on to all of that tradition, but also wanting to forge the path that I'm on too, and trying to strike that balance. And so I think that's something that I've heard from a lot of people, that kind of resonated with them, and it wasn't even something that I was trying to put in the book, but it obviously is something that's in the back of my mind because it appeared.
Yeah, and the book feels really contemporary. Keaton has a job in New York City with kind of a guru influencer, kind of a Gwyneth Paltrow-y type, Was that fun, kind of lampooning that kind of character in a way?
Yeah, it was so fun. And I think it's real. I think,
it was real.
It's real. Like there is, and that's kind of been an interesting part of my life to navigate too, because, as we've discussed, I think writing books now isn't just writing books. Like you're on social media and you're doing that, and you have a blog and a podcast and a web show and a whatever. Like your life as a writer is no longer being a writer, it's being like a multimedia conglomerate of one. And so I think I was trying to feed a little bit of that into there too, but yeah, Keaton is has really risen to the top of this company that she has helped build that is based around this woman who people are obsessed with. And I think we see that in culture, that you can become just like very interested in a person that you've never met in real life, and especially post-COVID. I think we've really seen that that's true. And I mean, I know there are so many people that I follow that I'm like, oh my gosh, everything they do I think is absolutely amazing. And so Keaton has kind of been behind the scenes, almost creating this image of a person who isn't real. And we see that all kind of come down, and we see that Keaton has created it so well that she started to believe it too. And then she looks in the mirror and she's like, wait, none of this is real. None of this is real. And so it just really sort of takes her back and makes her take a hard look at her life. And then, of course, the Dockhouse dames in Beaufort come in and fix everything for her, as they would for any of us. I mean, that's what we all need.
I just thought it was really refreshing to kind of, Keaton kind of wakes up out of the dream of the social media personality that says, and Keaton, she looks around and says, it doesn't matter.
Well, and she realizes that she sacrificed her entire life for something, for this
entire
job.
20s, right?
Yeah, I mean, she's given everything to it. She's like, I don't have friends. I don't cook. All I do is this. And I think it's one of those moments that maybe sometimes we have where you're like, okay, I have to kind of realize that there are other things in life besides just this, and I'm going to have to learn how to balance that.
Dinner parties play a major role in the novel, and I know you love a good dinner party. Can you tell us what you enjoy about planning and hosting a dinner party, and what you think leads to a successful one?
Oh, that's a great thing. Okay. Well, so I'm not saying that I do this at my dinner parties, but one of the things that I love most about the Rebecca St. James dinner parties is that she very perfectly plans the 8 people that are going to sit around the table. But her key to a successful dinner party is that everyone has a connection that they don't know. But throughout the course of the dinner, maybe they figure it out and maybe they don't, but it somehow leads to everyone feeling like they had this great time at dinner. And so there is someone in Moorhead City, like across the bridge from Beaufort, where he has these amazing dinner parties, and he does that. Everyone has a connection that they don't know about until they leave, and I think that is so fascinating because it does give everyone this common bond, like instantly, and you don't even know that you know, but you feel really connected to these people. So I'm a little more laid back about my dinner parties, but Rebecca St. James also table conversation is one of the rules of the dinner parties. You're speaking to everyone. You're not like just talking to the person beside you. You're talking to everyone at the table. And I think that's a really fun idea too. And I've been to some dinner parties where we've done that. And I thought that's so great. You learn about everyone at the table. And especially when you don't know people, you kind of walk away with a new friend and a common bond and all of these great things. So, but yeah, I'm more of a let's have friends over and cook whatever is in season and go with it. I'm not quite as planned. So if you think I'm Rebecca St. James, I am not.
You're talking about cooking whatever's in season. That seems impressive to me.
Okay,
I'm
right.
more like, do you like pepperoni or sausage?
Okay.
We can get both if you want to get fancy.
Well, I'll be honest. I shop, my husband cooks. So he's a very good cook.
So there are... in one of our early episodes, we hosted Lee Smith on the podcast, the beloved Lee Smith. I'm sure she has many fans here tonight. I think of Lee as the Dolly Parton of American literature. If you don't agree, you hate America. But Lee made a good point. Her most recent novel is called Silver Alert, and it's a quest, like a quest. A character goes on a trip. And she said there are only so many types of stories. Stranger comes to town, somebody goes on a trip. And another type of story is the fish out of water. And Keaton is the fish out of water. How did you play that up in the novel? Was that fun having Keaton? Every day, it seems to me in reading the novel, Keaton steps out of the house and is like, whoa, what is this? What is this crazy thing coming at me? Who are these women?
It was so fun. And I think it's, again, realistic. I mean, I was trying to capture Beaufort in a very realistic way. And I do think, all those things, like she steps out of the house and these men are across the street and they're like building this wooden boat. Like, who builds a wooden boat in 2024? And they're talking to her about sawdust, and then she's, walking down the street and there's a man dressed as a pirate working on the house, and she meets these women for coffee and they have coffee together every single morning, and they have all these crazy stories that can't possibly be true, but are they true? I do think, and everyone knows her name. She's like, how do all these people know my name? Well, of course they know her name. She's the only new person in town, and there are 4,000 people who live there. Of course everyone knows who she is, and her dog, but all of a sudden she finds herself being like a joiner. She's like, oh my gosh, like I'm this person who had no friends and no hobbies and nothing. And then all of a sudden I come to this town because there's no choice. They won't let you say no. You just have to just know that whenever someone comes and says, would you like to? You just should say yes, because it's an easier route to what's eventually going to happen to you anyway. But it changes her life, because she realizes that like she's all of a sudden thrust into this world where the people don't know her, but because they knew her grandparents, she is the most important thing to them, and they are going to make sure she's okay, whatever that means. And I do think that's the beauty of like a small southern town. They're going to make sure that you're okay.
And it's such an astute way to frame a novel, because if Kristy had written about a character who was a Beaufort native, we wouldn't see these really distinct things about the town, because to natives, they're not distinct. They're just a matter of course. But for the writers out there, the fish out of water is a great way to put place on the page. And you did such a great job of it in this novel.
Thank you.
So at the end of every podcast, we have the North Carolina lightning round, where I ask questions that are guaranteed to get email complaints about barbecue or sports teams or vacation spots. So we're going to move into the North Carolina round right now. And Kristy, we know that you grew up in Salsbury. What was one of your favorite things about growing up in Salsbury?
That there were Cheerwine slushies everywhere you go.
Strong answer. That's a strong answer.
I got to college and I was like, where are the Cheerwine slushies? And every store, restaurant, I didn't know that was only in Salisbury, and it was very disappointing.
When I moved down to Louisiana, my dad found out they didn't sell Sundrop in Louisiana, and he was like, I don't know, son. I thought we were closer than that. Do they sell Winston Lights, or do I need to bring those with me too when I visit? So that is your favorite thing about growing up in Salsbury. What is your favorite thing about your son, Will, growing up in Beaufort?
Just outside all the time. Water, fishing, just riding your bike through town, just all the things that are kind of like a throwback. Like he's kind of had this little, Huck Finn childhood where he just gets to just live like a simpler life, I feel like. And I think it was one of the things that made us say, I think we're going to stay here, because we realized about 6 months into being there full time that like, oh, this is like this every day, and he's going to get to live like a little bit of a slower childhood, I think, than maybe he would have otherwise. So it's been great.
And when I was there was the Marlin tournament going on.
Yeah, the Big Rock.
He was fully engaged with like weigh-ins
Yes.
and updates
Yes.
and like knowing what was going on out
Yes.
on the water.
Well, Kids Big Rock is next week. Well, when this episode is airing, in fact, it will be Kids Big Rock, and that's his moment, Wiley. That is Will's moment. Let me tell you what. He fishes all year long just to practice for Kids Big Rock. So we'll see how he does.
Y'all heard it here. Final question. You grew up in Salisbury, and they have a certain kind of cuisine. Now you're out on Beaufort, where they got a certain kind of cuisine, and you lived in Kinston. Fried okra or hush puppies?
Oh, fried okra. Fried okra.
Surprising
Fried okra.
answer.
Yeah.
Surprising
No,
answer.
But it's got to be done right. Like fried okra is only done right when it's like the way that your grandmother does it, and it's like super crispy, like out of the pan. It's not that like mushy. It's got the crunch to it. It's yeah. I'm an okra girl.
I
Why
love
are
okra.
y'all booing me about this? Come on. okra, you guys. It's a southern staple. I mean, I like a hush puppy, but if I'm choosing, it's okra all day long.
I'm okra too. And you can pretend I'm eating my vegetables. It's fried, and maybe in butter.
It
was green once upon a time, right?
The hush puppies have some corn, right?
That is a vegetable. It's got cornmeal. Hey, thanks for listening to the most recent episode of the Our State Book Club podcast. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or comments or suggestions for future guests or books, please email us at podcast@ourstate.com.
What might it be like underneath the sunrise in a state of flight? Coming back on me, it seems wonderful, the wandering mountain birds on a beach. Never moments ever wasted, turning away from your love. Honeybees, gardens of sweeter fruit, never tasted, no turning to other things. Will you be, will you seem? Sweeter fruit, never tasted, don't turn your back on me. Mountains pushing into the sea.